go. All right. But the browser is not cooperating for some reason. Okay, let me check the connection. Well, I do have an IP address. It's not connecting. And I cannot ping Google. So something is amiss with the network connection. Okay. 165.1.6. Can you guys access the internet? So you guys can access the internet. I have no idea why I cannot. Nope, it is not connecting. There we go. Okay. All right. Okay, I got two things. One is kind of fun because I want to give you guys this link here. It's in Moodle. It's on the first part of the course. It's their app of the month winner part. Okay, this is kind of more like a gallery of what people have done with App Inventor. So you might want to kind of go through some of these apps, just to see what people can do with App Inventor and how they do it too. Because if you kind of look at this, the Catch Me one, I think it is kind of similar to what we have done with the ball sprite one, except this one doesn't count the bouncing. Instead, the red ball is chasing after the one that you are controlling, which is the blue ball, and the red ball goes faster and bigger as time goes on. So the chances of the red ball actually catching up with the blue ball is increasing, as the game goes on. So apparently, it's a very easy game, fairly easy game to write. You can click on it. Okay, I'm just going to open a new tab here, and you can see this app is already up on Google Play. In other words, someone wrote the app and actually put it onto Google. There's no price, okay? So this is not a paid app, but nonetheless, people actually put apps up to Google Play so that other people can download, the package and install it. Okay, so this is something that you can consider doing too. If at the end of the semester you get your project done and you say, hey, this is actually publication quality, you can actually go ahead and do this. There are a few other apps, and you can also trace its way back to like last year and before last year and so on. So you might want to kind of check out some of these and just see what people can do with these apps. Okay. Any questions about this part, about the gallery and also the app of the month idea? No questions? No? Okay. Nobody looks particularly inspired? No? The best part about these is, if you click on one, you can actually go to the I think you can download the source code. In other words, you can find out how they did it in App Inventor blocks. So you're not just playing the app itself, but you can also find out how they did it. All right. So with this out of the way, I'm going to continue with one of the things that I just reopened today, which is down here in topic 10. Oh, okay, you still cannot see it because it's your project plan. Let me open it up first so that you guys can see it on your own computer. And the way I cannot open it up is because I might have it hidden. Yep, there we go, that's why. There we go. So you should be able to see it under topic 10, which is your project plan. This is the second homework assignment related to your project. This is the one where you actually have to do something to plan out more details of your app. All right, so we'll just go ahead and read this part here. You can read it on your own screen if you want to. The first thing you want to do is to revisit your own proposal. Okay, that's assuming you turn in a proposal. I think a few people may not have turned in a proposal, so those people will have to kind of think about the project, right now, because we need to get started on this one. The main focus of this particular homework assignment is to focus on the features. So this time we already know why someone should, the reason why someone wants to download and install your app. That's the first homework assignment. So with this new homework assignment, we are more interested in, okay, but in order for that person to have these reasons to download and install your application, what features are you going to offer in your application? So this time we are much more interested in the implementation detail and not so much on the purpose of what the app is going to do for people. Are there any questions about what a feature is as opposed to the first homework assignment, which is focusing more on the reasons why someone wants to download and install your app? Questions? Yep. Mm-hmm.
Would it be like a search feature? Would be a search capability?
Yeah. Yep. Search capability. In your case, an alert feature, can be useful too. Like, you just run the app, it will automatically, just click one button, it will spot everybody who is close to expire, with their registration or last time they took the class. So they will give you a list and say, okay, these people are, their license or their certificate is about to expire. You might want to contact these people now. Okay. So that would be a feature. But we'll take a look at more detail too, like how do we think about the features and how do we plan to implement the application. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to give myself a sample application, okay, just so that I can talk about this. So what I'll do is I'm going to use one of my hobbies, as an example. Okay, it's called field target shooting. Okay, it's basically a match format where people have to shoot air guns at targets and they count points. Okay, fairly simple stuff. So I'll give you guys an idea of what people do right now when they go for these competitions. All right. So let me see if I can find a really good description online here. Probably not so. There we go. I'm looking for pictures where you can actually see how people do it. Oh, okay, that's not going to help. Maybe images. No, I don't have anything fancy like these guys. These guys are shooting air guns that are, the gun itself is about $2,000-$3,000, and then they put like $1,000 scope on those things, and then they send the whole thing to a tuner to tune it for another $500 or so. Yeah, I don't shoot anything quite that expensive.
So it's the same thing as, it's kind of the same thing that they use when they actually hunt for deer. It's kind of the same concept.
Sorry?
I said that it is kind of the same concept for guns that they use when they hunt deer and venison and all that.
I do not know. Okay, so this is a pretty good picture. Okay, this is a really good picture to show you, how it works. Okay, so the first thing they do is they pair up people into squads. Okay, so 2 people is 1 squad, and then one person shoots the other person will basically take score and say, okay, it's a miss or it's a hit and stuff like that. So in this particular case, you can see the person in the white shirt. He is not shooting right now. Okay, so he's the observer, and the guy who's in the front is the one who's shooting, and he is the one who's going to get the points. And then once he's done, then they will reverse the roles. Okay, so the person who's shooting will take the points, will take notes, and then the guy in the white shirt will take time to shoot. Okay, so you basically have 1 squad has 2 people. Okay, now what they're shooting at is a little harder to see. It's right here. Okay, so let me see if I can zoom in here. It's a rabbit, but this is not an actual rabbit. Okay, so in most field target matches, no animal would end up actually getting hurt. If a fly so happens to be on the target at the time, then yeah, that fly usually would get destroyed. But it's very hard to do that. Okay, so this is a rabbit, and I'm not sure whether you guys can see a quote unquote a hole or kill zone on it. It's probably hard to see. I'll show you a close up of that target. Field target. Well, it's really just a field target. That's a good one. Okay, so this is a. Okay, these are the top one is a really kind of typical field target. So the orange part is a hole where you have to shoot through. If anyone hits the outside, which is the black part, it'll just make a ding sound, but it won't fall over. On the other hand, if they hit the paddle, which is right through the hole, then the paddle will fall over, and then the entire thing, this entire thing will fall over. And then to reset the target, you pull this string. Okay, sometimes the string is 55 yards long because that's the maximum range of these targets. It's up to 55 yards. So someone will have to pull that string and pull the target back up to reset it, so it will be ready for the next competitor. Is that okay? All right. So getting back to the first picture, which is here. Okay, so this is the actual target, and you can see this guy is probably aiming at this one. And then this is one lane. You can see there's a lane number here. This is lane 29. And there are usually, this is a really kind of a big match here with 29 lanes. Most matches have about 12 to 15 lanes. So this is a really, really drawn out match. And what happens is, with each lane, there are 2 targets. And there are 2 attempts per target. Okay, so each shooter will basically fire 4 shots per lane, 2 shots per target. Now with each attempt, if the target falls over, then it's counted as 1 point. If the target does not fall over, it is counted as a miss, which means it has 0 points. Is that okay? So that's generally the rule. When these 2 guys are done with this lane, they move on to the next lane. So whoever is waiting from the previous lane can move on to this lane. So another squad is probably shooting at lane 28. When these 2 guys are done, they move on to lane 30, and then whoever was in lane 28 will move on to lane 29, and so on. So this way, you can accommodate. If the entire match has 30 lanes, you can accommodate up to 16 shooters at the same time. Is that okay? All right. So that's the format of the match. So my app, which is hypothetical at this point, is for doing this. Okay. Images. I just want to show you the scorecard itself. See this gun here? That's a really custom gun. This entire tube here is filled with compressed air. I think this one is made out of titanium to make it really light. So they fill the entire tank up, with compressed air, and then there's a valve, a hammer to hit a valve to let the compressed air into the chamber, and then the compressed air is actually what propels the pellet out. You can also see he has extra straps here to keep his sitting position stable. So it's a pretty involved sport. People actually spend a lot of money on these things. Okay, this is the scorecard. Okay, so the scorecard typically is it divides into lanes, and on each lane, this one is not really that good because most scorecards would also say left target, right target, and each target has 2 attempts. And then we'll give you a total of how much you score on that lane. This one looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there can be up to 3 targets per lane, and then each card is only for 1 person. So when you have a squad, each person has 1 scorecard. So there are 2 scorecards to track for each squad. Is that okay? All right. So, but this is not really a good way to arrange or to keep score. Because on a windy day, what happens to these scorecards? They get blown away. Okay, so normally if something gets blown away, you just go out and pick it up, not at a gun range. The scorecard flies away, into even if it's just 2 or 3 yards into the range itself, you have to call code range. Okay, but when you call code range, okay, so that everybody will leave their firearm or air gun, on the bench, so that you can walk out to get something. They will all be focusing on you and go like, why did this person call code range? Oh, because his range card flew out into the range. Okay, so they will all have a little conversation with you after the match. So not a good thing to do. So that's why I don't want to use paper to keep score. Okay, because at the end of the match, guess what? All of these scorecards will get submitted to the match director, and then the match director will have to double check to make sure the total, all the numbers are summed up correctly, and then at the end of the match, the match director will announce the best shooters of the day and so on and so forth. But that's going to take like half an hour, depending on how many people are shooting. The match director actually has to spend the time to actually count the number of hits, the number of misses, and so on and so forth, just to make sure everything is right. So I just think, hey, we can use an app to do this. It makes perfect sense. Okay, so this is my example of doing the homework assignment. This is the paper form. I want to do it with an app. So if I want to do this with an app, what am I going to do in the homework assignment? That's the first question. So what you want to do is to to think about the screens and the screen layouts. Okay, you start with the screen and screen layouts from the perspective of the end user. Okay, so in my case, my users are people who are participating in field target matches. So I want to make the user interface user-friendly for those things. Is that okay? All right, so we'll go ahead and read these paragraphs one by one, and I'll be working on it, on the side. So I probably want to start up an App Inventor screen, just so that I can show you what you need to do also for your particular projects. Okay, so I will go ahead and start a. Okay, do not show this. I'll start a new project, and I'll call it Field Target Scorecards. All right, switching back to the homework description. I'm just moving this so that it's right next to the homework description tab here. Okay. Organize everything in screens first, then organize within a screen. In other words, we are using screens as organization units, kind of like an outline. Okay. Um, Typically, what we want to have, depending on your app, is we want to have a splash screen, okay? Especially if you want your app to look professional, because you intend to publish the app at some point. So the first thing you want to do is to create a splash screen, or reserve a screen for a splash screen, because only screen one can be a splash screen. You cannot change the screen. You cannot change the screen one into something else, or something else into screen one after the fact. So when you write your app, when you create your app, it is best to reserve screen one as the splash screen and use other screens for other purposes. Because all the other screens you can rearrange any way you want. Okay, you can say, oh, originally screen one goes to the main screen first, but now I want it to go to a second screen. That's okay. That's pretty easy to do. But if you want to turn another screen into screen one, that's almost impossible. You can do it, but it's done by a lot of surgical editing with the source code, which is not easy to do. Okay. So what I'm going to do with the app to turn this in as my homework assignment is I'm just going to name this one as my splash screen, because the screen one is the actual screen, that is a splash screen. And I'm not going to name it, the splash screen. I'll just call this, use the name of the application as the title. So if you look up the title here, I'm just going to turn this into Field Target Scorecard. There we go. And you can see, it is now called Field Target Scorecard. I won't even bother to actually put any graphics or any description on it at this point. Because remember, I'm trying to organize the application in big chunks, not in small chunks, okay? All right, so getting back to, whoops. Keep missing it. There we go. Going back to the homework assignment. The next screen, may be a main screen, okay? So it depends on your app, okay? Where you go from the splash screen depends on your application. In my case, I have to accommodate the cases where, okay, someone is using the application and then the phone crashed. I don't want those people to lose all the data, okay? Because they might have half the match already stored up onto the phone. I don't want them to have to redo everything. That's going to upset a lot of people, okay? So I want to give them a chance to restore or recover from whatever is already saved on the phone itself. So my main screen, is going to have those options. Okay. So now I go to my app here. I create a new screen. You just add screen here, and my next screen I can just call it the main screen. Okay, if I want to, screen main. This is just the name of the screen itself. It doesn't get necessarily displayed. Okay. And over here, I would change the title to just main. But at this point, I want to document what I possibly can do with this screen, which is the main navigation screen. So with the main navigation screen here, I might want to put in at least a few buttons to describe what the options are. Okay. With the first button, I might want to say Start New Match. And then with the second button, I might want to say Continue Saved Match. Okay. Okay. Because these are two main ways people can proceed from the main screen. Once they start up the application, they can choose one of these two options. I want to start a new match, which will get them to a configuration screen, and then, or they can say, I want to continue a saved match. They can just continue from wherever it was left off last time. Is that okay so far? Okay. I know this is really Spartan, okay? It doesn't look very good, doesn't look very professional. There's no splash, no graphics, nothing on it. But that's the purpose. I just want to organize everything in big chunks first, okay? I'm not too concerned about details at this point. So getting back to my homework here. You might need multiple main screens if you have many user interface elements, which is what I have here. Okay, so if you think about the application that I'm trying to write, if I click Start New Match, what do you think the new match configuration will ask me for configuration. Yeah, go ahead.
Your name.
My name? Okay, very good. So let's go ahead and do it, okay? So I'm actually doing my application now by, okay, so this is another screen. This is for new match configuration. Okay, and I'm going to change the title to just say new match configuration. And in here, I will have to input all the data that is important to remember, okay, what match are we talking about? There are several key components that has to be here, and many of those are text-based, which means I probably want to use a table arrangement because I want to display the prompt, which is a label, and just say, okay, this text box is about this text box is about that, and so on. So I'm going to drag, go to layout here, go get a table arrangement so that everything would line up and look nice. Go back to user interface, pick out a few labels. Okay, so I put one label here. As you said, the first thing we might want to know is, okay, what is the name of the match itself? Okay, I also might want to select a date because I want to remember what is the date of this particular match. So my table will probably need a few more rows. Okay, so let's say I'm just going to give it 6 for now. Okay, I can change that later. And I want to give it a date picker. To select the current date. Okay, so.
Did you put the date picker on top of the label?
Sorry?
You put the date picker on top of the label?
Yeah, you can. Well, I don't know what happened to the label. The label is still here. I think it just got put on top of it, which is kind of odd. Okay. But a date picker does not need a label because it's really just, it has its own labeling. So I go to here and say the text is match date. Okay. If you want to turn on the GPS and remember the location of the match, that's fine too, but I'm just going to go for a little bit more of a Spartan design here. So this text label is just prompting the user to input the name, okay, name of the person. And to input a name of a person, I will need a text box. So I put the text box over here, okay? What else do you think I will need in order to start a new match? What is needed to start a new match? Remember, there are certain things that are variable, okay? The number of lanes is variable. So I might want to enter that here, okay? The total number of lanes is going to be over here. So I'll write down here and specify this is the number of lanes. And I have a choice here, okay? I can use a text box so that people can actually just enter a number, or I can give them a slider, okay? A slider makes sense in some cases because I can just say, okay, I can give them a reasonable range of numbers, somewhere between 10 to maybe 30 or 40 would be kind of like a reasonable range. But if you want to allow the most flexibility, then a text box gives you the most flexibility. Now with each text box, you do have some options here. You can change the font size. Those are the typical stuff that you can do. You can also change the hint. So I'm going to put here and say this is going to be the name of the shooter. The actual text is the content, is the default content of the text box. I'm not going to put anything here. All right. And then with the second one, it's going to be a number. So I'm going to put in here. This is the total number of lanes in this match. So I can put in a little bit more user-friendly text inside the text box itself. Okay, what else do you think I need to start a new match? Remember, in each match, if the match itself has 30 lanes, I can have 30 squad members. I can have 60 participants because they can all start with a different lane. So in order to start a new match, what else do I need to remember? I know there are 30 lanes in total, but there's one more thing I need to remember.
How many participants?
No, not so much that. What is my starting lane? Okay, so the starting lane is important. So this is what I'll need to capture here as well. Okay, so this is the starting lane, which is also a number, and I'm going to use a text box for that too. Here we go. All right. So this is a really Spartan type of configuration, but I think it's going to be okay. Okay, you know, it captures everything that is already captured on a card, which is what it is replacing. Okay, it's just the electronic version of the scorecard, and I think, you know, the way it is now, you know, already has all the important stuff. I just need one more button to start the match. Okay, so I'm going to drag a button here all the way up to outside, and say start match. Okay, there we go. Now, depending on how you want to do this, because you can have one single app to keep track of both, to keep track of the entire squad. So this might get fancier. Okay, if you can say, okay, these two or three people are in the same squad, because sometimes we end up with an odd number of shooters, and then you have one squad that has 3 people instead of a squad with only 1 person. Okay, because they always want to make sure that, you know, the person who's shooting is not the person who's also keeping score. Not because we don't trust people, just because, you know, it's kind of hard to do it. You have to shoot, reset the target, put down everything, pick up the piece of paper, you know, put down the paper, and then, you know, do the whole shooting thing again. So that's why, you know, typically we have, you know, we can have 3-member squads. But assuming, you know, each person has his or her own phone and running, you know, that particular only for that person, this is what we'll do first. Okay, we'll keep it basic. Okay, do all the fancy features later. All right. Is that okay? But this is what I want you guys to do too for your own application. Where's the logic? How does it make sure that the number of lanes is actually a number before we click, you know, start match? How does it know starting lane is a number that is greater than or equal to 1 and less than or equal to the number of lanes? I'm not too concerned at this point. Okay, I'm just designing the user interface. Is that okay? All right. Okay, so assuming someone, you know, enter all these things here correctly, click the start match. What do we see next? The next screen. So we are in a match now. Okay, so it already knows what is the starting lane. Okay, with each lane we can have 2 or sometimes 3 targets. So that number varies as well. Okay, so what do we do on the next screen? So let's go to the next screen here. What do you think the next screen is going to do once I click start match here?
Needs to build a grid, or needs to build based off the number of lanes you can score from.
Right, because I'm just walking into a lane right now. Okay, so the first thing I walk into a lane is to observe the lane and go like, do we have 2 or 3 targets? Because sometimes they might have 3 targets. Even though 2 is a more typical number, we can have 2 or 3 targets per lane, or possibly even more. So that's the first thing I need to do. Okay, so the next screen is to configure a new lane. Okay, config or lane config. Okay, lane configuration. All right. Change the label first, change the title to lane configuration. Okay. Now with lane configuration, I already know the lane number, okay? But sometimes, you know, I might want to switch between, you know, and say, okay, let's move on to the new lane, or let's go back to a previous lane. So I would use a table again for layout for layout control, and we'll just go start with 6 rows again, okay? Because you can always shrink it back if you don't need all those rows. You can always change that. And with user interface, the first thing I would do is to put in a label outside of the entire thing. And this is just going to be, it would just say lane number XYZ, okay? So XYZ is going to be substituted with the actual lane number. I just need a label to remind me what the purpose is, what is the purpose of this particular label. It shows me, okay, which lane we're dealing with here. With each lane, we only have, yep.
So the question is that do you want, okay, so basically when we actually have labels and we have text boxes that have, let's say, numbers, or text boxes that basically require letters, do you want us to check that to make sure that there is numbers or letters in there?
Yeah.
Or just
Well, you should, because your end users will do all kinds of stuff to break your app. So if you don't do error checking,
So, isn't that usually done on basically the end that is not in the app? Because I don't think the app can actually check it. You have to use PHP for that, don't you, or no? Or
okay, it depends on two things, okay? There are several things you have to check. First of all, did the person enter a number? If a person enters like ABC or not something that is not a number, how do you process that number? How do you compare that number to something else?
Okay.
So you have to check it. Now, even if you can say, okay, this text box can only have numbers, and that person actually entered a number because there's no choice but to enter a number, is that number within the correct range? Well, you have to check that too, because end users will do whatever they want to do, and a lot of times, it's not what you are expecting people to do when they use the app correctly.
So can you do that using the app, or would you have to use that
You have to do it in your app. Where else are you going to do it?
using the back end?
Well, there are certain things you can do in the back end, but there are certain things you can already do in the front end. If you can do something in the front end, you do it in the front end. If you cannot do it in the front end because it depends on what kind of data is in your database, then you have to do it in the back end. Okay? Is that making any sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So in this case, with each lane, I need to configure a few things. Okay, so we need to enter the number of targets of that lane. Okay, so we say number of targets. That's just a label. I just need to remind myself what is the text box entering. And then we put a text box next to it. Here we go. All right. So I think that's the only thing we need to do with starting a particular lane. And once the lane is configured, we can now let's start with a target. So we'll change the text of this button and say start on this lane. All right. So I know the screen doesn't really do a whole lot, but that's okay. Okay, this is one of the things that people have to enter once they start a new lane. So assuming somebody just click okay, enter the number of targets is 2 or 3, and then click start on this lane. What do you think the next screen is going to present me? So now we have we're starting on the lane. We already know how many targets are on that lane. But given the limitation of App Inventor, what do you think we have to do? Now there's one more thing you can input here. Okay, you probably want to put a default to that one. Okay, so we'll put here, this is the number of targets per on this lane. Typically 2 or 3, okay, which means you might have some other number, but 2 or 3 is the expected number. Oh, I think this is what Beckman was talking about. You can click number only. So this way people can only enter digits and a decimal point. It doesn't mean that number makes any sense to you. Because somebody can enter a negative number. You cannot have a negative number as number of targets on the lane, right? So you still have to do some checking. There's no way to avoid error checking when you're dealing with an application where people interact with it. In fact, you cannot avoid error checking for any type of application, any type of programming. You have to validate the data. Because what happens when we don't validate data, when we make assumption and say, yeah, people should know how to use this program correctly, people should know how to use this protocol correctly, and so on and so forth. What do we end up with? Security issues, vulnerabilities, because they happen because people do not think about, oh, maybe somebody will intentionally try to break this program to try to do something nasty to it. Okay? So you always make the assumption of what? People will use this incorrectly. Check. Every single time you do something about the input, you have to check and validate. How much code are we talking about? About validating the input, making sure everything is correct, and so on and so forth. Expect at least half of your blocks to be just doing that. But that's just the way it is.
Yeah,
Okay?
it is.
That is just the way it is. You have to spend a lot of code and a lot of logic just to make sure that the data people put into your program is in fact correct and valid. Okay? All right.
So, okay, so question is, how exactly would you check that using the app? So basically, would you have to...
I can give you an idea. Okay, it's just your code. Just use the blocks to do it. Okay, but I do want to put in something else here. Okay, because I want to input the number of attempts per target, because that can potentially be changed. I have never been in a match where it is not 2, but I can kind of imagine some people say, but what if I want to make it 3? Fine, make it 3. Okay, this is the number of attempts per target, typically 2. Because I know it is typically 2, I would select numbers only for 1, and I would also put in the 2 by default here. In other words, I don't want people to have to enter a 2 every single time, because that is the typical answer. In fact, I would do the same thing to the previous one. Just put a 2 here because it's typically 2. In other words, most people go through this screen just by clicking start on this lane, because typically a lane has 2 targets and there are 2 attempts per target. There's no need to change it for the most part. They walk into a strange lane that has 3 targets. Okay, now you have to change one of the numbers. Okay? So you want to make your app so that if a particular case handles 95% of the cases, just make a default value for it. Okay, so that people don't have to, click it, put in a number every single time, even though they do the same thing like 95% of the time. Okay, so use a default value if that makes sense. Okay, so there we go. Any questions about this screen? If somebody clicks on start on this lane, what do you think the next screen is going to look like? Well, that's the actual scoring. Right? Because now we're actually on a lane, we are starting on a particular target, and we want to score, is it a hit or is it a miss? Okay? So let's take a look at the next screen. And you can see how I'm looking at this app from the perspective of the end user. Okay, I'm just the end user. I'm just trying to do everything with an app rather than on a piece of paper. And this is, I'm just going through the match myself in my mind and go like, okay, at this point I need to do this, at this point I want to do that, and so on. So when you're doing this to your own app, because you are the person who came up with the idea of your own application, go through the same process, okay? And just think about, what do I need to do on this particular screen? How do I want to partition the whole thing? It's okay to use more screens, okay? It's not a problem, okay? Use more screens if you need to, even if one screen doesn't do a whole lot. Because you can always come back and say, oh, I want to make this more complicated. I want to make this look nicer, and so on and so forth. Okay? So you can always just kind of use up more screens, because it's harder to add more screens later. It's easier to fill up a screen later on and just make it look fancy and all, but it's harder to say, oh, I got too much stuff on one screen, I need to split it into multiple screens now. That is harder. All right, so I'm just gonna keep this one the way it is. I'm not even going to shrink the table itself, even though I could have, So we'll go ahead and start on this lane. So the next screen is going to be what do we do on the lane? Okay, so we say this is score lane, or lane score, whichever way you want to call it. So this is for scoring a particular lane for a particular competitor. And I'll change the title right away and say score a lane. Okay. All right. This is where the limitation of App Inventor will require you to be more creative, okay? Because I cannot create a variable number of text boxes depending on the number of targets on each lane and the number of attempts per lane. I cannot do that, okay? The App Inventor doesn't let me do it. So what do you think is an alternative to do it? I can think of a few ways to do it, but I want to see what you guys think. Okay, remember what I need to do? Okay, I would, shoot one target, okay, and I go to my app, or whoever is my squad, member is going to use the app and go like, okay, hit or miss, and then move. Then I'll use up a second attempt on the same target, okay. And then I move on to the next target, first attempt on the next target, and so on and so forth. So what do you think is the most intuitive user interface to get through this?
Use a button that just adds one more, or it adds one more, and it doesn't press the button, then the score is 0.
Or you can have one button for a miss and one button for a hit.
Oh, okay.
Okay? And when you click that button, it will not only register for that particular attempt, but it will also see whether it's the last attempt for that target. If it is, it moves on to the next one. So this way, whoever is doing the scoring just needs to press one button to move on. Now you might want to allow an edit feature so that you can go back to the previous one if you need to make some editing. That might be possible, okay? But we want to make it as easy as possible for that 95% of the time. For that extra 5% of the time where you go like, oh, okay, sorry, I misrecorded this one, you need to supply a feature to go back to the previous one, okay? All right, so what I'll do is I'm going to use a list box, okay? That's just my personal preference, okay? I'm going to use a list box, list picker, okay? And the list picker is going to have its own title of select target attempt. There we go. In other words, when someone clicks on this particular list picker, then that person will have the ability to go back to a previous target and a previous attempt and change it. But it will automatically default to whatever it's supposed to. So the first time I get into this screen, it will automatically default to target 1, attempt 1. But when I click the next button, one of the next 2 buttons, either hit or miss, it will automatically advance this one too. So this way, most of the time you don't have to deal with it at all. It's just displaying which target and which attempt we are on at this point. But if you do need to change it, you can use this to go back to the previous one. Go like, oh, okay, I forgot, or I made a mistake. Change that. Okay. So after this one, I'm going to use a label. Okay, so go pick up a label here to clearly indicate which lane we're on. This is lane XYZ, target XYZ, attempt XYZ. Okay. And I want to make it a larger font just to make it more visible. So I think 16, yeah, 16 works okay. Because I just want to make sure that people understand, okay, which one am I scoring? This makes it very clear, okay? Everything up to this point, which lane, which target, and which attempt on that target is made very clear. And then the actual interface to enter a score is going to be simple, okay? I will use a horizontal arrangement, like this one, and just put 2 buttons in it. Here's one, and the second one. Right now, I'm not too concerned about making things fancy, so this one I'll just call a hit, and this one I'll call it a miss. Okay. When this application, when I'm actually going to work on this and try to make it, fancy, make it look attractive and whatnot, instead of just, using the word hit here, I'm also going to use a cross, okay? Because that's how most people use a scorecard, is they put a cross, like a check mark when it is a hit, and the miss is usually represented by a circle. Because that's how people do it on a piece of paper, I want to make the transition as easy as possible for people who are used to the paper method. So this way it is easier for those people, because now it's just, okay, I know what a check is, I know what a circle is, they just pick one of these 2. At the end, on the last attempt, I can have an extra button here to confirm, and go back to the previous screen, or I can make it automatic. Okay? But that's how I arrange my application. Are there any questions about how to write your app? How to get this started? So I'm assuming all of you know what kind of screens you will need. It's just a matter of time to put it into App Event. Okay. Now with this one, it just occurred to me here. Okay. I want to go back to here and change this one so it's not just target and attempt. Well, I cannot do lane. Okay, so let's just do this part here. All right. So now I have quite a few number of screens. Okay, screen 1 is the one where the name of the screen cannot change. It has to be screen 1. But all of the other ones you can change if you need to or if you want to. And obviously, other than screen 1, there's no particular order. Okay, right now I have 5 screens. The app will only start with screen 1, but where screen 1 goes to is entirely up to my logic. Okay, and that's why I want everybody to keep that in mind, because if you want a splash screen, there's only one option. It can only be screen 1. All of the other screens, you can reorder things as many times as you want to. Doesn't really matter. But screen 1 is the only one that can be a splash screen. Is that okay? All right. Okay. Any other questions before we move on as far as the homework assignment is concerned?
So just so the home assignment, basically all you want is the pictures of what the actual screens.
No. Well, have you read through the whole thing?
I think it makes sense to me.
Well, there's more to it. There's more to it. All right. So take screenshots of your screen layout and include that in your plan. So instead of doing that, you can also just write it into your application and turn in your quote-unquote app here. Okay, but that's not the only thing I want you to turn in, because I want you to turn in a quote-unquote inventory. Okay, this is the part where things get a little bit complicated. Designing screen is fairly visual and design oriented. So this part is what I just did. Okay, I just kind of imagine that I am the user of this particular app, and I go about doing, okay, I want to do this, I want to be able to do that, and so on. The implementation, which is basically the use of blocks, is a little bit more analysis oriented and synthesis oriented. Okay, analysis means you're breaking down stuff. Okay, and synthesis is the other way around. You are trying to synthesize or make things, recreate things. So what you want to do is you want to just take a quick inventory of what App Inventor 2 supports, because there's certain things it can do and easily done. Other things it's like, well, it cannot quite do that. Okay, so you need to keep an eye on those things. The user interface elements are easy as they are neatly organized in the design view. Okay, if I go back here, this is what I'm talking about. Okay, you can go through the user interface, go through the layout, media, and so on, and this will give you a pretty quick way to kind of inventory what kind of features is supported by App Inventor. Okay, pretty easy. The non-visible components, clock, TinyDB, activity starter, web, are also important, but these are they're not as easy to figure out, because when you look at sensors, okay, some of these sensors, most of the sensors, if not all, are invisible. Okay, then they're not visible. So you have to kind of click on each one to find out, but what can I do with it? Okay, what can I do with a accelerometer sensor? Okay, would it be helpful in my particular application? A clock, what can I do with a clock? Now, remember, a clock is it's not just a clock. Okay, it doesn't just keep track of time. It can also give you timer events. It can also do all kinds of conversion of time format. It allows you to do calculation based on time. Okay, so a clock is not really just, oh, what is the current time? It's not just give me timer events. It can do a lot more than that. Location sensor, which is a GPS sensor, definitely is useful as well. Near field, this is NFC, near field communication. Orientation sensor, which is your compass. Okay, proximity sensor is on most phones. There's a little sensor to see whether you're holding it next to your ear or not. That's your proximity sensor. It only has a very small effective range. It's only really good for detecting whether the phone is already picked up or not. Okay. We talked about some of these social aspects. Sharing particularly is useful, because if you have a file to share, this gives you the options of, okay, let's pop up this sharing screen that you're probably familiar with Android, and you can select one of the many ways of sharing something with somebody else. Texting, we talked about it briefly. Storage, okay, you can store something into a file. You can store it into TinyDB. We talked about the use of Firebase DB, okay, which I think is a great idea. As long as it is not something secure, it's okay. Okay, if it's something that is that needs to be secured, or it is private, or there's privacy concern, then it's probably not a good idea to use Firebase at this point. Maybe at some other point at a later time, but not at this point. All right, so that's a quick inventory. The most hidden stuff is what you can do with various data types. For example, what you can do with numbers, text, and particularly lists. So there are only really 3 or 4 things that you can do, or 4 types of things. Numbers, easy, right? You can do addition, subtraction, comparison, and so on. Text is good for storing names. You can still do comparison, you can sort and stuff like that. Lists is really hierarchical, they're containers, okay? And a list can contain other lists and so on and so forth. So they allow you to organize your data in a very, very creative way. There's only one missing here, which is Boolean, true or false. Okay, those can only be indicating a Boolean result, which is true or false. Make a list of things that your application needs to track. Okay, this is part of your homework assignment. Okay, big round. You're getting it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is also a part of your homework assignment, is to track what your application needs to track. Some of your project proposals, or some of the proposed projects, has more stuff to track, okay, like yours, and also with this one, there's quite a bit of stuff to track. Some other applications may not have nearly as much stuff to track. So it depends on your application itself, to determine how much stuff you need to track. For each item, for each thing that you want to track, you also want to know whether it is supposed to be transient, as in it is not persistent. When the application crashes, it's gone, or whether it has to be persistent, where you want to save the state. Now, with the app that I'm just talking about, every time the user enters a hit or a miss, I want to store that somewhere. Okay, because if people lose track of their score card, during a match, they'll be pretty bad. And I certainly don't want to be in that situation. They go like, oh, TAC, your application crashed, and I just lost, all of my lane, data because of that. Okay, so that's not good. So you definitely want to make that part persistent. Every single time, there's a score entered, save it. Okay, now how you want to save it? It's up to you. Do you want to use Firebase, to save it? I think for a scorecard like this, it's okay. It's no big deal. Do you want to use TinyDB to store it? Sure. Okay. TinyDB works fairly well. The only thing you don't want to use TinyDB to store is something that refreshes like 100 times a second, because you're just going to wear out the flash card inside your phone really quickly. For something like this, for my field target scorecard, it's not a big deal, okay? Because there are only 4 attempts per lane times 15 lanes, only 60 updates to the flash card. It's not a big deal, okay? That is okay. So how you want to store your data, once again, depends on your application, but you need to think about what is persistent and what is not persistent, okay? Don't think that you can organize such a list in your mind, because there can be a lot of stuff, and if you think you can track everything in your mind, you might lose some of those items. So you want to just jot down the items as they float to the surface of your consciousness, because sometimes they float in a they don't necessarily float to your consciousness in a logical manner. Okay, sometimes it just pops up. It's like, okay, I need to do this. So you might want to just kind of jot down a list and then organize later. When you see items that are related, group them together. Let these items coalesce as you spend more time thinking about them. It is important to jot down everything so you don't forget. So take a moment to take an inventory of the features supported by AI 2. In doing so, your brain will subconsciously try to make the connection from what you want to do to what is available. Okay? So now we have to connect the user interface components and the data components. Okay? So now we have a kind of like a table. All right, so what I want to do, okay, we'll just go through this and explain it first. The user interface, that's the easy part. How the data components are going to use that is the connection that we want to make. Okay, all right. So given the app that I have created up to this point, okay, I want to in my mind, I need to keep track of these things, okay? Because I know that there's the concept of a batch, so I want to write down, I'm going to use a notepad here, okay? This is nothing formal. I'm just going to use this to capture my ideas, and then we'll kind of massage it into something that is much more organized. Okay, so we know there's a concept of a match. Inside a match, there's the concept of lanes. Inside a lane, there's a concept of a target. And then inside the concept of a target, there is the concept of attempts. Okay? Now the indentation is not random. Okay? I use these indentation to indicate there are multiple lanes in a match, there are multiple targets in a lane, and there are multiple attempts per target. Okay? And then for each attempt, I have to record either it is a miss or a hit. Okay? Okay, so given this kind of view, what do you think will serve me well for recording all the data that I need to record? A list, okay? In fact, it is going to be a list of a list of a list of a list of a list. Okay, it's a folder thing, right? Because at the top part we'll have a match. Okay. Okay, so at the top part we have a match, and then it will have data of multiple lanes. Okay, so it will have data of lane 1. Inside lane 1, it will record information of target 1. Target 1 has attempt 1, which may be a miss. Then I adjusted something with attempt 2. It is finally a hit. Then I move on to the second target. The first attempt is a hit, and then the second attempt is also going to be a hit. Then I move on to lane 2 and kind of do about the same thing. So you can see this is really kind of like a folder structure. Okay, a match is a folder of lanes. Each lane is a folder of targets. Each target is a folder of attempts. Now, when we get to attempts, there is no need to use a folder to remember whether it's a miss or a hit. That can just be a value. Okay, you can even use 0 to mean a miss, or 1 to mean a hit. Okay, so as far as how it is stored as opposed to how it is displayed, it's up to you. Okay, 0 and 1 it's easy to store. We don't need to use the words miss or hit. But this is the structure that I want to use in order to record all the data. But that's not it either, okay? Because within a match, I also have some other attributes for a match that I need to remember. Because with a match, I still need to remember, the name of the shooter. I need to remember the number of lanes, right? Okay, so those are the things that I need to remember. For each lane, I need to remember the number of targets and then the number of attempts per target. So there are other things that I do need to remember in addition to the hierarchical structural thing. So I need to kind of jot down these ideas. Okay? This is what I'm doing right now, is to jot down the ideas, and kind of help organize these things. Is that okay? All right. Okay. So I'm going to store this entire thing in a single list because a list can be hierarchical. So if I turn this into a list, what is it going to look like? Well, we know it's a list, right? Okay, so let's start with a list. That's a list. And at the top level, we have the concept of a match, okay? So we'll just say that there's no concept on top of a match, even though there really should be. We'll just say that, okay, a match is the top level structure. But within a match, we have several things that we need to remember, okay? So we have the name of the shooter. So this is just an example, okay? So it will remember it is me. We have the number of lanes, right? So we have the number of lanes. It is going to be 15, okay? And then we have the actual data, okay? So here's the actual data. But the data of this match is basically arranged in lanes, okay? So we have, once again, we have a list here. Within this list, each item is a key value pair, where the key is the lane number. So let's say I start off with lane 12, okay? This is lane 12, and the data for lane 12 is going to be its own list. There are several things I need to remember about a particular lane. The first thing I need to remember about a particular lane is the number of targets. And let's say this is a fairly typical one, only has 2 targets. I also have to remember the number of attempts per target. In this case, it's also typical, just a 2. Then we have to remember the data of that particular lane. But the data of this particular lane, well, this part is up to you, okay? It has to be a list anyway, because you can have a variable number of targets and a variable number of attempts. So this one has to be, a list. If you want to do it, it's up to you to how you want to organize this. Okay, it all depends on how you want to pay the price upfront and organize it right so that things are easy to look up and change later on, or you want to make it intuitive, but then later on you pay the price of you looking up is harder. Okay, reversing the operation is harder, because the first thing you can do is to look at the target first. So this is basically target 1. And then within target 1, the value corresponding to target 1 is going to be a list. Okay, once again, it's a key value list. And I'm going to change these to not just data. Okay, this is lane data, so I can differentiate what kind of data we are dealing with here. This is target data. And then within the target, we have attempts. Okay, so this is attempt data. So what I'm going to put here as the value is going to be the data corresponding to attempt 1 of, whoops, take it back. Because there are multiple attempts, so this has to be a list too. So this once again will be a list. And the first item is going to be, 1 is the key of the first item, and then the actual value of that item is whether it's a miss or a hit. So I would put a 0 here if it is a miss. I would put a 1 here if it's a hit. Okay, so I'm just going to put it here like 1, 1, and then we have a 2, 0. Okay, so what this means at this point, what we are seeing on the screen is the first attempt of the first target of lane 12 is a hit. Attempt 2 of target 1 of lane 12 is a miss. Okay? So it is not simple, okay? But if you think about it, it's not difficult either. It's just that when everything is represented as a list, you just see a lot of parentheses. Are we doing okay so far with this stuff here? But that's what we need to think about, is to how do we organize this? And then from this, going back to the screen, we have to map out and say, this screen deals with this data. This screen deals with this data. This screen deals with this data. That is the matrix, the grid that I want to see. Okay? Or some other way that you can explain to me how things are organized internally and what type of user interface element you are creating to handle it, and how do you draw the connections. Is that okay? So this is a 2-step process. The first part is end user driven. From the end user's perspective, what are the screens that you need to use? Okay, what screens do you need to create? What features, what buttons, what text boxes, what labels do you need to use on each screen? That's the first part, end user driven. The second part is data driven. Okay, in order to get your application implemented, what kind of data do you need to store, and how is that data organized? That's a whole separate thing. And then the third part is to make the connection between those two. This is the data structure in the back end that I need to maintain and store. This is the user interface. Those are the screens. Those are the control the control components and whatnot. Now, how do I make that connection? That connection can only be made by your own blocks, by your logic. There's no way that App Inventor can make that connection directly. There are some applications or some application engines that can do that. Like, I'm trying to think of the name. I know what I want to talk about, but I cannot remember the name. It's an Adobe product for making web pages. Dreamweaver, that's it, thank you. So Dreamweaver can actually make that connection fairly easily. You can say, oh, this box here is coming from that field of that table. Okay, it can make that connection, but App Inventor cannot do that. Okay, so you will have to make the connection. Is that okay? So in this case, I will need to make the connection and go back to this picture here, and I will have to say, okay, this data here is going into this screen. The data for lane is going into the lane configuration screen, which is this one here. Information about the match itself is going to the match configuration screen, which is this one here. Is that okay? So this is what I want you to do for this particular week, is just to analyze what screens you need for your application and how you are going to organize the data in the back end. Are there any questions about what you need to do?
So for turning in the assignment,
Yep.
we're turning in the project in App Inventor to show the layout, and then we're also turning in just like a text document.
Right. There are
showing the
two.
layout of the data.
There are two ways to turn. There are two things you can turn in. You can turn in both a file, and also turn in HTML documentation as text. So, you can, if you need to turn in multiple files, you can zip it up and then turn in the zip file. Because some people might want to do what I just did, and actually start with an app, because eventually it will be your app, right? So you might as well just start earlier and get this part done. So with this one, you can just go to projects and then say export selected projects and turn it into an AIA file as one of the files that you're going to turn in. And then separately, if you use a matrix, like if you use Excel to arrange and say, okay, these are my screens and elements in the screen, and these are my data items, and across means they're connected. If you do it that way, just zip up both files into a zip file and turn it in. Or if it is easier, if you don't need a full matrix, you can just describe it in HTML as a document. Okay, good question. Any other questions? Other questions? Does anyone change your idea or change your mind regarding what project you want to do? Okay, so if you have changed your mind, you might need to mention that in the documentation and say that this is my new project idea and this is what I want to do. So you want to kind of repeat the first assignment, which is not much, just a few reasons why people need to want to download and install your application, who the actors are, what the use cases are, on top of specific things that are specific to this assignment. Any other questions? No other questions? Okay. Now, at this point, if you just know that, okay, so let me go back to my list representation here. So you look at the list and go like, well, I kind of know that this is kind of a big, complicated thing to do. I don't quite know how I can drill down to a particular item at this point. Don't worry about that, okay? That's implementation detail. We just need to be aware of, okay, I need to get this done eventually. But at this point, I just want you to make the connection and say that I need to go from here to here. Now, how am I going to do that? I'm not good at list manipulation. That's okay. Okay, we will cover that later on. Is that okay? All right. Now, this app that I'm just talking about does not make use of GPS, doesn't make use of the compass, doesn't make use of the camera, the microphone, multimedia, or anything like that. So it does not necessarily represent your application. So your application may need to access the web for certain resources. You might need to download files, to play or to view. Okay, so it's entirely up to you to decide, how you want to structure your app. This is just an example. Is that okay? All right. So I think the lecture portion is all done. So let's take a break, 10-minute break, and when we come back, you guys can start working on this homework assignment. And if you run into any questions, I'll be here to answer. Or if you have any questions about, okay, this is my app, I don't quite know how to get started with this phase of the project, I can explain that to you as well. I'm going to stop the recorder.